We are in 1 Chronicles 21. We're going to pick it up in verse 18. It says, "Now the angel of the Lord had commanded Gad to say to David that David should go up and raise an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So David went up at Gad's word, which he had spoken in the name of the Lord. Now Ornan was threshing wheat. He turned and saw the angel, and his 4 sons who were with him hid themselves. As David came to Ornan, Ornan looked and saw David and went out from the threshing floor and paid homage to David with his face to the ground. And David said to Ornan, 'Give me the site of the threshing floor, that I may build on it an altar to the Lord. Give it to me at its full price, that the plague may be averted from the people.' Then Ornan said to David, 'Take it, and let my lord the king do what seems good to him. See, I give the oxen for burnt offerings, and the threshing sledges for the wood, and the wheat for a grain offering. I give it all.' But King David said to Ornan, 'No, but I will buy them for the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing.' So David paid Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight for the site. And David built there an altar to the Lord and presented burnt offerings and peace offerings and called on the Lord. And the Lord answered him with fire from heaven upon the altar of burnt offering. Then the Lord commanded the angel, and he put his sword back into its sheath. At that time, when David saw that the Lord had answered him at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, he sacrificed there. For the tabernacle of the Lord, which Moses had made in the wilderness, and the altar of burnt offering were at that time in the high place at Gibeon. But David could not go before it to inquire of God, for he was afraid of the sword of the angel of the Lord. Then David said, 'Here shall be the house of the Lord God, and here the altar of burnt offering for Israel.'" The altar was whispered in David's ear, remember? The Lord told Gad, who was the spokesperson in this story, "Tell David to build an altar." There's nothing we can do because of the law to stay the plague and get this angel off the trajectory of destruction. Remember, he's standing there with his sword drawn. There's nothing else to do unless you build an altar. And Gad tells David, "Build an altar, quick," right? And the altar went up, and it says that the angel sheathed his sword. That is such a cool visual of this angel standing there to bring judgment, right judgment upon David and the people. But the altar stayed the plague, and the altar sheathed the sword, which is awesome. The altar is going to be our text for tonight, is what we're going to talk about, is the altar. There were an estimated 24 altars built to the Lord in the Old Testament by nearly every major player that you can think of. Noah built an altar. Abraham built an altar. Jacob built an altar. Isaac built an altar. Everybody built an altar to the Lord. Why did they do that? There were lots of reasons. It depends which story you're in. But there were altars of worship, right, for worship. There were altars that were set up as a mile marker of a point in the journey that the Lord had brought them to, that they were thankful about, either at the end of the battle or obtaining some part of land or huffing it through the wilderness or whatever, and just stopping and giving thanks to the Lord, because we love to raise an Ebenezer and say, "Thus far the Lord has helped us," and many Bible characters did that in this sacrifice of worship. Many of them built because of repentance, something they were working on with the Lord, and they built altars. Lots of altars went up. Altars were built on mountaintops. They were built in valleys. They were built in open fields. They were built in people's backyards. There were altars going up everywhere in the Old Testament. So the question is this altar in 1 Chronicles 21 just another altar of another major player who's building an altar on the ground? We've seen it 24 times before. What makes this altar different? Is it just one in the mix, or is there something to it? No, it's not just an altar. It is actually the altar. And that's what makes this significant. This is a pivotal chapter. It is pivotal. Almost as pivotal as the Davidic covenant was pivotal. This chapter sets up all chapters for the rest of time. Not even a joke. It is hugely important. It is actually the altar, which is why I wanted to talk about it tonight and split this chapter up, because we don't want to miss it. It's a providential altar. It was one that was foretold a long, long time ago. And that is like the coolest. Turn to Genesis chapter 22. There's several things that I want you to note in this chapter. No matter how many times I have heard this chapter, something pops out at me every time. This is one of those chapters where it is the gospel forward and you can't miss it, right? It's right in your face. But then it just gives you treasure upon treasure every time you dig into it. And that's what I love about the Bible. So check out chapter 22. It says, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. And God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on where? One of the mountains of which I will tell you. This verse will preach all night. One verse. One statement from the Lord. You could stop here and we would take up our whole time. I'll try not to do that, although I wouldn't really apologize for it. It's amazing. God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, up the mountain. The son whom you love. Bible students, mark it. It is the first mention. Love. Bible students, watch for it. First mentions are really important in the Word. Most of them are in Genesis, okay? Somewhere towards the beginning. That's what's really fun about Genesis, is so much is a first mention. But usually the first time that the Lord introduces a theme or a word in His Scripture, the context of how He uses it is the essence, the foundation of the context of the word, almost every time. Love. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, up the mountain. Which mountain? Moriah. First mention, Mount Moriah. Write that down. Mount Moriah. And offer him there as a burnt offering. Why is that important? Well, there's lots of sacrifices you could bring to the altar. There's grain sacrifices, I'm totally blanking out, some fruit and vegetable sacrifices, there's peace offerings, there's all kinds of things that you can bring. This is specifically the burnt offering. This is the one that is fully consumed by the fire of God. It's for atonement. It's important. Okay? Burnt offering on one of the mountains that you pick. No. On one of the mountains that is easier to hike to. No. On what? One of the mountains. I'm going to put you on a specific mountain peak. Okay? You guys got that? So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him, a specific place, right? On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to the young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come back." Isn't that sweet? Abraham knew somehow this was going to work out. We're coming back. Both of us. Check this out. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid the wood on who? Who is his son? His only son, whom he loves. The Father laid the wood on the Son, right? Mm-hmm. Check it out. So they both of them went together. And Isaac says to Dad, "My father, here I am, my son. Behold the fire and the wood. But where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." God will provide himself the lamb. How prophetic is that? Yeah. Newer translations try to help you out. The real translation is pretty clear. God will provide himself the lamb. He didn't mess it up. That's what he meant. Right? God will provide himself the lamb. So they went, both of them together, united. Another thing to note about this story, when you color it in Sunday school, this kid is usually 10, 8 maybe. Isaac is 30 years old. He's an adult. He's 30. He's not a kid who doesn't understand, who's just following Dad up a mountain. This is an adult. They are united. They're going up together, and nobody's stupid. They know what's happening. And check it out. Isaac carries the wood. What is Abraham carrying? The fire and the knife. The son carried the wood. The father carried the burden of killing his son. Where's the lamb? God will provide himself a lamb. You guys, this chapter doesn't just like every time you read it. So both of them went together. Verse 9. When they came to the place which God had told them. How many times is this now? Repetition. Third time so far. It is a specific place. We're not to miss it. Abraham there built the altar. Yeah, he did. He built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the wood on the altar. His 30-year-old son whom he loved. Isaac laid down himself. Abraham is 100 years old. You think strappy Isaac can't take him on? He laid down in obedience to his father, you see. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Violent, brutal. But the angel of the Lord, who shows up? Jesus shows up. Here's one thing about watching this chapter. God told Abraham, you are going to be the picture book of Calvary. You're not going to understand it, but you're going to do it in obedience. And Abraham's like, here I am. Imagine the heavenlies. Imagine what's going on in heaven between the Father and the Son, watching the Father and the Son play this out. And the angel of the Lord shows up himself and says, Abraham, Abraham. We think it's God. It's not. That's not the character that calls it out. It's the angel of the Lord. And he said, here I am. And he said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God. I know how hard this is for the dads. I got it. Seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. It's over. Only me and my father can play this out. Stop, Abraham. And Isaac climbs back off the wood, and they put a propitiation in his place. Right? The burnt offering. So Abraham called the place Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. Jehovah Jireh. God will provide himself the lamb. Indeed, he does. Jehovah Jireh. On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Mark it. On the mount of the Lord. The very peak. God said, nope, keep going. Nope, keep walking. You got 1.25 miles, take a left down the ravine. I've got one peak. Here's the thing about Mount Moriah. It has 80 peaks to choose from. It's a mountain range. I'm sending you to one place, one spot. You're going right there. And you're going to build the altar on that mountain peak. And there, God will provide on the mount Mark my words. You guys see it? The altar. Moriah today is called Mount Zion in modern day history. It's Mount Zion. The Temple Mount is part of it. Golgotha was probably on Mount Moriah, not in the same area, but you've got this big mountain range that's around it. It's not on the Mount of Olives, and that's the next closest thing. They're not really sure where, but all of that is the mountain ranges of Moriah. Does that make sense? There's more than one peak. The Temple Mount. God put Abraham on this mountain, on this peak, in a specific 2 square feet, and said, right there, stop, a little to the left, 2 inches to the right, right there. This is the place. This is the place. On the peak, in its place, on purpose, you guys. It's the place of the prophetic blueprint of our redemption story, and it's bookmarked here for us in Genesis 22. First mention. The first mention is often the context of what that definition is. Calvary is the definition of true love on Mount Moriah. Take your son, your only son, whom you love. Is there any other context where love would first appear? No, not in God's economy. Love, you see. Such a word that's thrown around and abused these days. The definition of love, full sacrifice of God's only begotten Son. That's love, you see. Bookmarked. Okay, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 12. The question then tonight, how is David's threshing floor altar in 1 Chronicles 21, aka 2 Samuel chapter 24, how is that altar linked to Abraham and Isaac way back in Genesis chapter 22? Check this out. Deuteronomy chapter 12 is the law of worship. Moses is in the twilight of his life and he's recounting the law, right? Deuteronomy is a really double telling, it's kind of what it means, of the law. He adds kind of a different twist to it, where kind of like Samuel and Chronicles, where Samuel is really boots on the ground, you're kind of in the dirt of it, and Chronicles lifts you up to a more heavenly perspective. Deuteronomy is the heavenly perspective of the boots on the ground Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. It gets to the heart of the issue of the law, not just don't eat bats or bugs. I am sanctified in both counts. I have not done that. You don't believe me? It's true. I have not eaten a bat. So one of the laws, I'm good. No one gets it. See, I try to be funny. It doesn't work. It never works. So this is the law of worship. There's 2 parts to the law, okay? Deuteronomy 12, worship. Part number 1 is to worship in a specific way. Part number 2 is to worship in a specific place. Worship in a specific way, worship in a specific place. There's a whole chapter dedicated to it. Worship in a specific way. Look at verse 4. In context, verse 1 through 3 is talking about how pagans worship. How they worship all willy-nilly. They worship whatever they want. They worship in high places. They worship in groves. They worship the sun, moon, stars, dirt, themselves. It's pagan. Then in verse 4 it says, but you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes. You guys should be marking these. Ready? Start over. But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will, out of all your, to put his, and make his dwelling place, his habitation there. Where? In the place that he chose among the tribes that he will pick himself. There you shall go, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contribution that you present, your vow offerings, your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and flocks. Where? You're going to go to this specific place, the place that I choose out of the tribe that I chose. That's how you're going to worship. Okay? Rule number 2 was in a specific way. Right? Worship to Jehovah will not mirror the way of the pagan worship. You're not going to worship however you want. You are instead, verse 8, you shall not do according to all that you are doing here today. Everyone doing everything that they want right in their own eyes, all willy-nilly. That's not how it's going to be, he says. For you have not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance that the Lord your God is giving you. You're not there yet. They're still on the dirt side of Jordan. They haven't crossed. The Lord's like, you're not there yet. You're not in the land of your inheritance. Verse 10. But when you go over the Jordan, which they will with Joshua, right? And live in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, the promised land. And when he gives you rest from all your enemies round about, when that happens, so that you live in safety, then to the place that the Lord your God will to make his name dwell there, there you shall bring all that I command you. When you cross the Jordan, when you've taken the land, all your enemies are subdued, and you are dwelling in safety, then you will worship me the way that I wanted you to all along, in the specific place that I tell you. When is that? When is that going to happen? The temple. When they are settled, when they are in, when they are safe from their enemies and dwelling in safety, there is no other time than Solomon. When the temple is finally up, when there's actually a solid place where everybody can come together to worship the Lord in the way that he designed, you see. Note, he said, seek the place, the chosen place, within the tribe, God will abide there. They already have the tabernacle. They've had the tabernacle dragging with them through the wilderness for 40 years. He's not talking about that. He says, when you cross over here and all these things line up, you are going to worship me in the place I chose, the way that I told you to do it, you see. Among the tribe that I called, the tribe of Judah, Jesus' tribe, you see. This place was chosen by God, but it was already bookmarked in Genesis chapter 22. The place is on the mountain on the mountain peak in a specific square footage. Right here, Abraham. This is the place for the altar. And God's like, I already have it chosen out. All you have to do is worship there in a specific place, in a specific way. Bookmarked Genesis 22. The place of sacrifice, gut-wrenching sacrifice on Mount Moriah will be the place of worship. The place I chose. That's going to be the place, you see. Genesis 22 verse 2 versus 2 Chronicles 3 verse 1. This is what it looks like side by side. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the Mount of Moriah and offer him there. Just in a little bit, I think that's 2 Chronicles 3:1. Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah at the place that David had appointed. When did David appoint a place? 1 Chronicles chapter 21. On the threshing floor. On Mount Moriah, where our text says in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 verse 1, right? What did David say then? Here shall be the house of the Lord, and here the altar of burnt offering. Right here shall be the blueprint of the temple, and right here will be the altar of sacrifice. Right here. Little did David know, God already picked it out way long ago. He already made a law way long ago. And with God's providential hand, David's like, right here. And remember the angel of the Lord whispering to Gad, tell David, built an altar. No, not there, a little to the left. No, a little bit, yeah, a little right. Yep, right there. Right there. You see it? This is rad, you guys. Is anybody else nerding out on this? Just me? I love this stuff. Love it. The altar. Okay, I have a video that Chloe's going to help us with, and so is Clara. Watch this. Check it out. They're going to get it going, but I want you to see kind of the topography of this area. All right.
The city of Jerusalem is located in an area of three major valleys, the Hinnom, the Central or Tyropian, and the Kidron Valley. The mountain range between the Central and Kidron Valley is called Mount Moriah. The peak of the mountain is a large protruding flat rock, which is now located under the dome of the rock. According to Genesis 22:2, Abraham was commanded to sacrifice Isaac in the region of Moriah, connecting the Temple Mount with this significant event. At the time of King David, the area of Jerusalem was controlled by the Jebusites, the city only occupying the southern part of the central ridge. When David captured the city in about 1000 BC, he made Jerusalem his capital. David then moved the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and began preparations for building a permanent structure to replace the portable tabernacle of Moses that had been used for over 400 years. With the ancient city of Jerusalem being fairly small, David purchased the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite so he could expand the size of the city. Being higher than the city of David, the hilltop would make a beautiful place to build the temple of the Lord. Under the reign of David's son, King Solomon, the temple construction began. After 7 years of construction in about 960 BC, Solomon finished building the temple, most likely built over this same protruding rock of Mount Moriah. Solomon also built himself a new palace just south of the temple and expanded the walls of the city up towards the peak of Mount Moriah.
I took the Athey Creek group down to the Western Wall tunnels, And you have to go through all these corridors and stuff, and it's kind of fun. Feel a little bit Indiana Jones-ish as you go down into these tunnels, and you go deep down into them, and basically some of these stones, they start, you see some, Crusader era stones up high, and then you get down deeper to the 1st century, Second Temple period, and then you get deeper, and see, this is Steve, and he's our tour guide, Jerusalem, and again, it's hard to see this, but you can see the raw Mount Moriah, but before there was anything on it, and right there, that's what it looked like topographically. And then Solomon built this huge foundation right there, giant foundation, and that's called the Temple Mount today. He built the temple on top of that. AD 70, the temple was destroyed. Later, they built the Dome of the Rock. That's what you see, and that's all to scale, by the way, that little model. So the Dome of the Rock seems huge when you see it on a picture, but the temple was bigger. And it was an amazing structure that the Jews built at the time of Solomon.
David then he goes to Ornan, the Jebusite, and asks for land. It's his property. It's his land, right? And he graciously is like, yeah, take it all, just take it. He's terrified because there's like an angel of death and stuff. But he's like, take it. And David says, no. What does David say? Full price. I'll buy it at the full price. I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing, right? It has to cost something. It has to be costly. Sacrifice has to cost you something, and David knew that. And all the while, the angel of the Lord is watching something play out that had played out in Genesis 22 on the same spot. It's like, yeah, it costs a lot. And little does David know how much it will cost with Jesus, right? So now the Lord has established the altar in its place. What he wanted from so long ago is actually there, and it's built, and David offers offerings to the Lord on Mount Moriah. It is absolutely amazing. Okay, turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 28. Flip the page a little bit. David understood the importance of a right altar on the right place, and he declared in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 that it would be the heart of the temple. Right here, the temple's going to be, and right here will be the altar, the heart, the gut of the temple, the most important part of the temple for the general public to be able to bring their sacrifices of atonement to the temple. David now is in a frenzy of temple inventory, training up employees, right? It's chapter after chapter after chapter. Him writing worship songs, training the choir, maybe making some instruments. Okay, he's very busy in this temple preparation. He's got cedars coming down the river from way over there, and you've got kings of Hiram bringing some stuff in, and he's compiling gold. So much gold. Billions of dollars worth of gold, and so much silver and bronze, they decided to stop counting it, the Bible says. All this is going on, this frenzy, this training, these worship practices, and in the middle of it all, David charges his son Solomon. Solomon, who is about 22, somewhere in there. He's very young. Look at verse 9. Chapter 28, verse 9. David says to Solomon, "And Solomon, my son, know the God of your father, and serve him with your whole heart, Mark it. Serve him with your whole heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. If you seek him, Solomon, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. Be careful now. Be careful, Solomon. Be careful, Solomon, he says, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Watch yourself, Solomon. You have been charged with a monumental task. The temple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Follow him forever, Solomon, because sober, crazy, you're building the temple, the dwelling place of God, where he chose to inhabit in the midst of men. Talk about an assignment. And he's very young. David's a little anxious about passing this project on to Solomon. In fact, it almost has to be pried out of his hands. Solomon is young. He's inexperienced. He doesn't know what he's doing. And it actually took some coaxing to get this project out of David's hands into Solomon's hands. And he tells Solomon, he's like, watch your step, Solomon. Watch your heart. The heart of the temple. Watch it, Solomon, because you have been charged to build a house for the sanctuary. Be strong and do it. It's the same charge we have. We are the habitation of the Holy Spirit. The temple we're called. Watch your step. Be sober-minded. Love the Lord your God with all you've got, because you have been tasked as the temple of the living God. Watch your heart. Watch your altar. Solomon, he says, he charges Solomon. It's the first fatherly thing David's done his whole life. He's finally saying something to a kid. Amazing. And it's actually good. And you can hear the heart of a father who loves the Lord. Despite it all, he still loves the Lord. And he's looking at his son, and he wants him to do well, and he wants him to succeed in the Lord. Watch your steps, Solomon. Don't be a fool like me. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul. You're tasked to do something that I couldn't even do. Here you go. The altar, you see. Look at chapter 29, verse 10. We're going to read this whole thing. David stands before Israel, and he speaks. Therefore, David blessed the Lord in the presence of all the assembly. All of Israel is gathered before King David. And David said, "Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty, for all that is in heavens and in the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. In your hand are power and might, and in your hand it is to make great and give strength to all. And now we thank you, O God, and praise your glorious name. But who am I, and what is my people, that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all things come from you, and of your own we have been given you. For we are strangers before you and sojourners, as all our fathers were. Our days on the earth are like a shadow, and there is no abiding. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own. I know, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasure in uprightness. In the uprightness of my heart, I have freely offered all these things, and now I have seen your people who are present here, offering freely and joyously to you. O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our fathers, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in the hearts of your people, and direct their hearts towards you. Grant to Solomon, my son, a whole heart. Then he may keep your commandments, your testimonies, and your statutes, performing all, and that he may build the palace for which I have made provision. Heart, 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 over and over and over again. The altar, you see. Couple things about the altar. Before the temple was ever started, before one stone came out of the quarry and landed on the temple mount, on Mount Moriah, the altar was already there. It was already built and had already been consumed by fire. It was already there. Many focus on the exterior of their temples when their altar is in ruin. How they look on the outside to others, to the Lord. They worry about outside things when inwardly their altar is cold. David wanted to make sure that Solomon knew the issue is always the issue of the heart. The altar, the inside. Love the Lord with all your heart. God, give my son a whole heart to love you. David was concerned about Israel and their heart towards the Lord, his son and his heart towards the Lord. The temple was kind of thrown in at the end. Give them a heart. Light their altars on fire. Light them up. It's a father's cry. God, give him a heart to love you, a whole heart. Man, I mean, we all cry that out. A whole heart. Light him up. Light him up on the inside. A consuming fire. David knew the altar was the heart of the issue. And yeah, he was doing all this to like undergird his son, but his prayer was for the inside. For the inside, you see. There are many beautiful temples out there without an altar at all, just no heart. Not even an altar that went cold, but just one that's not even there. It's all about the heart. God cares nothing for the doing if the heart is out of line, you see. Solomon's story starts out high, on a very high note. Solomon did love the Lord. Doesn't end good, and it doesn't take long. We're only a few chapters out. Just a teaser for where we're going in light of this prayer that David has for his son Solomon. As soon as your altar, the place of worship in your heart shifts to anything other than Jehovah, your whole temple falls off its foundations. All comes tumbling after. It's called idolatry. Anything exalted in our hearts above Jehovah is an idol. Solomon will fall, and it's not redeemable for the nation that splits in half. idolatry. The temple. God, give him a whole heart. Solomon, if you follow me with all your heart, you will be found by me. You will be successful. We're going to trot together. I'm with you. But if you turn from me, the Lord says, it's over. Your temple will shift off the foundation. And that's what happens. The altar of the heart. Solomon will fall prey to it. Spoiler alert. If the heart of the altar is in the right place, like David's, no level of destruction can move you from its foundation. David messed up. David messed up hard. David, disaster. But his heart was after the Lord the whole time, at the heart of it. Though his temple was destroyed and, hurricanes and bomb bursts and everything, the heart of the altar stayed on that foundation to the very end. It wasn't pretty. His altar was destroyed on the outside, but his heart was solid. You see, Solomon started out solid, but his heart shifted and it all came down. Solomon looked so much shinier than David, but at the heart of it, David stayed true to the Lord at the heart of it, at the altar. And his foundation stayed put. Solomon was shiny on the outside, but his altar failed. His heart shifted and everything went down. See the difference? The exiles. They're in Jerusalem. Babylon's on the attack. They've sieged Jerusalem and Babylon takes it down. And the temple is destroyed. This temple, Solomon's pretty temple, beautiful, it goes down. They're exiled out of the land and they spend some time by the rivers of Babylon with Daniel and Ezekiel and the gang. Cyrus releases them and some of them, a handful of a remnant of Judah, come home and the number one thing they do before they do anything else, they crest the hill of destroyed Jerusalem. They crawl over the rubbled walls, over the destruction. They climb up Mount Moriah in just all this destruction. They climb over the temple that's in ruins, totally destroyed. They find the place of the foundation of the altar and they put it back. Before they build anything else, the altar goes back on. Why? Idolatry took us down, all the way down. It started with Solomon to this. The problem was the altar the whole time. Put it back. Light it up. It's the first thing the exiles do. I know what went wrong. The altar. And they're ragtag, you guys, and there's not even that many. And they go to the thing, and they don't even have a tent. And they're like, I don't care. We're not even building a hut. Put the altar back. It's that important. You see, the altar has to be up. There's no reason to build or rebuild a temple until the altar is restored. That's what they knew. It doesn't matter what the exterior is. You got to put the altar back. David said this, create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. When did he say this? This is the psalm after Bathsheba. Man, that temple went down, right? It's looking ugly. David, pull up, pull up. What's he do? He goes to the Lord. He tells Nathan, yeah, I messed up. He goes home and he writes a psalm and he says, restore my altar, light me up. Nothing's right. You got to create in me a clean heart, you see. speaking of the exiles, are sitting in Babylon. Ezekiel is encouraging the people. Daniel is in the palace doing his thing with all the kings, and Ezekiel's on the front lines with the Judeans in real time, boots on the ground, and he says this to the exiles. The Lord said, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh instead. It's all about the altar of the heart. It's all about the altar, you see. Turn to Romans chapter 12. I appeal to you, brothers, I'm begging you to listen up. By the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I am begging you, Romans, by God's mercy, get on the altar. That's what he's saying. Present yourselves a living sacrifice. Crawl up there willingly, like Isaac, like Jesus. A living sacrifice is such a very vivid idea, a living sacrifice. Not one that had been slaughtered and put up there, one that's still alive. A living sacrifice. Here's the thing. The sacrifice is living because it was brought alive to the altar. Sacrifice is living because it doesn't wiggle off the altar. It stays put. It's living because it stays alive on the altar. It's living because it remains at the altar. Present yourself a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship or your reasonable duty. It's what we're called to do. It's not an option. This is what we do as believers. We are living sacrifices. It's your duty. It's reasonable. It's common. We're all to do it. You see, the altar, living sacrifice, demands the full price. I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. It better cost me everything. All in is what the Lord requires. All in. Your whole self on the altar. All in. Full price. David knew that. At the heart of it, it better sting. It better hurt. It's got to be the full price. On the flip side, we can take a picture of Ornan the Jebusite, who when the Lord came and said, I need an altar, he said, and I'm all in. Here's my burnt offering. Here's my threshing floor. Here's my land. Here's my tools. Take it all. That's the heart the Lord wants. To the king, Ornan said, and you've got it. I am all in. Watch your altar. Watch it close. The enemy's tricky. He wants you to worry a lot about the pomegranates and the animals, the exotic animals that are coming in, and all the gold and the marble and all the pomp and circumstance and the really good worship and all the stuff that's going on at the temple. He wants you distracted by that while your altar is cold. That's what he wants. David's like, put all this aside. God, give him a heart to love you with all his self.